Hey guys, how we doing? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the next review in the On Wax Reviews series. Now this obviously comes very shortly after my last one that I did on Tyler the Creator's latest record, but I knew I had to get on here and talk about the surprise drop from Kendrick Lamar. The legendary rapper, songwriter extraordinaire is back with his sixth studio album, GNX, and no one really expected this, especially after, the long gap between Damn and Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which was, I think, about 5 years. So the fact that this came out 2 years later after Mr. Morale was really quite a shock. And if you guys remember, have been around this long, that was my first review in the On Wax Review series, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. So it's kind of a full circle moment here, coming back to Kendrick being the first artist I would have reviewed twice in this series. So I knew I had to get on here and at least give my thoughts on this album, because I think Kendrick Lamar is one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time. Certainly, probably in my top 3 hip-hop artists, along with Kanye and MF Doom. So I really do think he's undeniably one of the best, has really shaped the genre and the album art form in hip-hop in a conceptual way that I don't think many have previously tapped into. And just his sensibilities as a storyteller are so vast, so articulate, so brilliant. And I think it is undeniable the impact he has had on not just hip-hop, but pop music in general. So obviously every time he comes out with a release, I owe him that much to go and listen to it. But I think ever since Damn, he's been on a bit of a downslide, especially with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I wasn't really a huge fan of a lot of those songs. I wasn't a huge fan of the sound of that album at all. And I really do think, even though there's some amazing stuff on it, I think that it really is a big fall off in quality. And sometimes I kind of feel people just give Kendrick a pass because he's Kendrick Lamar. Now, I never do that for anybody. Unless it's like the Beatles or something. And even then, I would say the Beatles for Sale isn't like a great album. But there aren't many artists who can keep that consistency for the entirety of their careers. And I think we've been seeing this with a lot of the big mainstream artists that are really staples in pop music, like Beyonce, like Taylor Swift, like Kanye West. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But a lot of these artists aren't delivering like they did earlier on in their career in the early 2000s and 2010s. And I think with GNX, I have the same exact problem in that sense that I did with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. It just feels very slight compared to a lot of the other stuff that he's done in the past. Now, I get he's not trying to make this super ambitious, epic album in scope like To Pimp a Butterfly, but at the same time, I do expect a little bit more than what we actually got. And look, it's a surprise, so I can't say that I'm necessarily disappointed, but I really was hoping on this next release we would have gotten a little bit more. Now, what I will say with this album compared to Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, I think it does not have the highs that Mr. Morale has, but it has nowhere close to the amount of lows that that album had. I think that it is somewhat middling in that regard when you look at it, but I think overall it's a lot smoother of a listen. I think it is more digestible, and I also don't think it's as atrocious. Now, of course, there's going to be a couple songs that I'm not huge on this album at all. But yet again, with Kendrick, there's always something interesting being said. There's always something going on that is much deeper, at least in a few of his songs, that are just truly extraordinary. Even though I think a lot of the times feel like he ends up falling victim to a lot of the trends that are populated in mainstream hip-hop and trap music, because my biggest thing with this album is I think a lot of the production on here is truly spectacular. All the flourishes on a lot of these songs is very, very stylistically inspired. But then when you get to the flow and the actual beats of the song, it's not much more than an above average trap song. And I'm not saying this is this case for every single track on this album, but I do think it is quite evident that that is a big problem for a lot of tracks on this entire record. But to kick off this album with Waxed Murals, you get this very beautiful Spanish vocal intro from Mexican singer-songwriter Deira Barrera, and it immediately caught me off guard when I first heard it, because I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's very, sort of flamenco-esque, and I really love the ominous backing vocals on this track, and also the production throughout this entire song. I mean, the flourishes in the production are just exceptional here, and I love that the whole song is basically Kendrick reckoning with his status, and, kind of looking back at the people he's looked up to, like Lil Wayne, and how a lot of these people sort of, I wouldn't say disappointed him, but of course, he's trying to make a point of staying true to himself and not letting anyone drag him down, especially when he got the Super Bowl in New Orleans over Lil Wayne in his hometown. And so there's a lot of lines that shout out a few people on here, like Nas was the only one to congratulate him for that. And then, of course, the whole thing about Snoop Dogg posting the tailor-made video from Drake with Kendrick praying that he hoped it was the edibles. And luckily Snoop Dogg has come out since and said, yes, it was the edibles. But yet again, I think Kendrick is really kind of trying to look out for himself here in an industry that he's really stayed true in when it comes to, not losing himself in a rap image, as he says in the song, like a lot of these other rappers, like, I can think of one, who's very prominent and has a lot of history with Kendrick, we'll say. And I really do appreciate that he's kind of getting on here and, talking about these issues. But one of my big things with this song, because lyrically I think it's great, my problem with it is I don't think his flow is really anything that is above average. And my buddy put it to me best, so if you're watching this video, you know who you are. But he basically says he doesn't like when he does these stupid voices. And he kind of like really neuters his flow, I think, by kind of dialing it back and trying to, do that. Because as much as he's not putting on a persona, vocally, it isn't the same as what we've known him to be and why we see him as one of the greatest MCs of all time. Like, it just really feels a little wimpy. I'm going to be honest at certain points. And I definitely feel that a little bit here. I think the song gets stronger as it goes along. And that's the thing. There's a lot to appreciate on the song, and I do really like it overall. But I think the flow holds it back just a little bit for me. And then you got Squabble Up, which has a great thumping beat and Madonna sample, of course. But once you get to the hook and he's like singing, "Get the fuck out my thighs," I was like, what the hell? I'm like, this is just so bad. I mean, it is absolutely horrendous to listen to at that certain point. And it really kind of kills an otherwise really great song. I, once again, love the production here. But it's choices like that that really confuse me, because I just feel like continuously throughout this album, Kendrick kind of handicaps himself. And I don't know why, because he really could have elevated these songs to a whole other level if he wasn't making some very strange choices when it comes to the melody or the delivery of the song. And I think that was definitely the issue with the second track. And then Luther opens up with this beautiful acoustic guitar intro, but that leads into the most generic trap beat and auto-tune melody you can hear, which is really unfortunate, because I think the orchestration and the chord progression are pretty great on the song, but yet again it just kind of gets held back by these decisions that are really the only thing that are holding this back from being a phenomenal song. And yet again, I could say that for so many tracks on this record. And then when you get to songs like Man at the Garden, I think the production flourishes, especially with the seismic beat and the rain pouring down, is just so lush and arresting. And talking about how he's earned everything he's gained due to his status in the industry. But even with that being said, the "I deserve it all," like, it gets a little bit repetitive, though I like how he kind of turns it towards his family and his community by the end of the story, and it becomes a more inclusive line, and he subverts it in a very interesting way. And I think it absolutely has such an explosive climax right before simmering back down by the end. But really, I think this is one of the better songs on the album. I just think it could have been a little less repetitive by the time we got to the end of it. And then you get Hey Now, which, of course, more great production, not to be surprised here, but the lyrics are pretty braggadocious, and he's doing that voice again, and then they start holding hands with the aliens. I mean, I know that there is definitely some kind of deeper meaning here, but I definitely don't think this track really stood out to me in any meaningful way, at least from my perspective. But Reincarnated. Whew, this is what I'm talking about. This is classic Kendrick through and through. Just a wonderful piano sample, which I believe was sampled from a Tupac song. And that makes sense, right? And just the seductive bass line and guitar licks all throughout this song just immediately grab you. And of course, I love how this kind of tackles, I guess, the continuous cycle of, fame and, explored through these famous black musicians. Like, I'm assuming he's alluding to John Lee Hooker in the first verse and then Billie Holiday in the second, and all the addiction and vices that they had to go through. And then Kendrick looks at himself in the third verse and is kind of having this dialogue with his father, aka God, and trying to figure out, well, it's like, I've been doing all these things. I've been trying to help my community and all this stuff. I've been trying to, bring empowerment through my music and not war. And then, of course, God calls him out on being a hypocrite because, of course, the whole Drake feud. And so it adds so many interesting layers, but then how it's kind of talking about how God sends Lucifer back in the form of all these musicians. It is just unbelievable songwriting on this track, and I think that this could stand up on any of his best albums. Even To Pimp a Butterfly, I think it would fit right in, removing the Drake context aside. I just think this is an absolutely astounding piece in Kendrick's discography, and I think easily the best song on this entire album. And then that is followed by TV Off, which honestly, I think is one of the weaker cuts on this record. I really do love the blaring horns in the second half of the song, but even the transition from the first half of this song to the second half feels a little bit choppy. I think the beat is pretty monotonous, and I definitely think the outro to the song by Lefty Gunplay is just really not good. The crazy, scary, spooky, hilarious. It is just like, it is grating to listen to, and yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of this song in particular. Yeah, it's kind of sad to follow up the absolute best track on the album with that, but, it could be worse. Then you get to Dodger Blue, which has a great synth line, but yet again, a very monotonous melody. And I think it is an interesting ode to LA, kind of him basically saying you kind of have to love it, to hate it. At least that's what I kind of got from the track. But other than that, there wasn't really lyrically much to take away from that song. And then don't even get me started on Peekaboo. Because this is easily like one of Kendrick's worst songs. And then like how he keeps saying, what are they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. And then you get to the Peekaboo, Peekaboo, Peekaboo. Like, it is just absolutely fucking ridiculous. And the hey, 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 that's my bitch. Yeah, the lyrics are pretty awful on this one, and I hated the song. To be quite honest with you, this is almost as bad, I think, as the worst tracks on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, but luckily, I think the album gets a lot better from this, and there's nothing quite as atrocious as this song for the rest of the runtime. But thankfully that leads to probably the second best song on this album, Heart Part 6, where you get some more really great acoustic guitar to kick the song off, and some of the most extremely tasteful neo-soul production that you will hear on any hip-hop record, period. Talking about the beginnings of Kendrick's career and looking back from where he is as a black executive at this point. And as the hook says, use your heart and not your eyes, I think that really sums up the crux of the narrative here, basically telling us of all the times they, be spending in the studio just getting some Jack in the Box, or, laying on the floor and, kind of like talking about all their dreams and aspirations, and how the personal connections he made through that time in the industry are what really are the most meaningful to him. And I also love how he took back the title of the Ahart series, because everyone knows Kendrick's been doing these for years, but he took it back from Drake, who stole it for his diss track against him. So I really like how he's able to reclaim that for himself and really make such a beautiful ode to those creative people who, he holds very near and dear to his heart, and such a great triumphant story of success. Yeah, there's not much to dislike about this track at all, and easily one of the strongest cuts on this album. And then you get the title track, of course, which I think is honestly another generic, repetitive, and braggadocious trap song, though once you get to Hit a J3's verse, I do think that there's a little bit of substance there, kind of talking about all the people that he's lost and grew up with due to gang violence, I'm assuming. But I don't know, I think it just kind of like delves off into, fairly standard lyrical territory that we've seen explored in hip-hop so many times that it really doesn't do much for me at all. But I will say, after hearing this album a second time, the closing track here, Gloria, is just absolutely really great. Of course, the flamenco opening really helps this track, bookending this album in a really beautiful way with great instrumentals underneath. The melodic line, though, I will say it put me off at first, because I think it starts out a little repetitive, but it really does grow on you, because the narrative of this is so absorbing, and how, he kind of uses this woman, Gloria, as a metaphor for his writing and his craft, and how he can use that to empower people but also damage people, and how that dichotomy between love, hate, empowerment, suppression is so prevalent to him in his life. How sometimes he feels like he wants nothing to do with it, but then when he comes back to it, he falls right back in love again. And I think, yet again, the way they use this as a double entendre in the storytelling, especially with a great chorus from SZA on here, who I think is featured a couple times on this album, it really does feel like such a well-earned conclusion to this track, and definitely summarizes a lot of ideas that Kendrick's been tackling his entire career, but yet again, he does it in a very interesting way. So I have to say I love the song at the very least, and because of that, I do think that I probably prefer this a little bit more than Mr. Morale, but really not by much. I don't know, I kind of feel like I said before, I think people just give Kendrick a pass because it's Kendrick. And yeah, there are definitely glimpses of brilliance on this album, but I think it's not few and far between, but certainly compared to his earlier work, it is not even close. So on that note, I'm going to give GNX a 6.5 out of 10, probably edging a little bit closer to a 7, but I don't know, this isn't really one I'm going to come back to besides a few songs, but that's the thing, those songs are so strong. I think some of the strongest of Kendrick's career, especially Reincarnated, so you definitely have to give credit where credit's due at the very least. Yet again, next time he comes out with an album, I'm going to listen to it day one. But I don't know, I really do hope that he definitely widens his, narrative scope and kind of like his musical scope as well. He's definitely got a lot of interesting elements that are new, and he's blending it in interesting ways, but certainly with a lot of elements that I think contrast for the true creative triumph that an album like GNX could have been. But what do you think about this album? Please let me know down in the comments below. Would really love to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's one of Kendrick's best, or do you think I'm completely off the mark here? Or do you completely agree with me? Please let me know. I really would love to hear the discourse around this album. And please smash the like button, subscribe to this channel. There's definitely going to be more of these reviews coming very soon. One next week, in fact. I know I've really been banging these out after having a long period of inactivity, and I really do hope that you check that out when it drops next week. So stay on the lookout for that, and so many more movie reviews on the horizon as well. For now, I will ask you to take it easy, and I'll talk to you soon.